I should say that if you are a distant learner, please raise your hand. You could see them, Moshe? What? And they get to be seen. Wow, this is getting... Well, I have a few friends out there also. I'm just going to focus on them. Vornak and just watching. All right. So there's three ladies that said they went to get coffee. That's, I guess some people.
Why don't we talk to each other?
Okay. Are people online already? So that, so they're already watching now? They're seeing you right now? Okay, so we're going to begin in a couple of minutes for anyone who's watching and wants to just get their cup of coffee reheated. We have 2 more minutes before we begin. we're just waiting a couple of minutes. There are three ladies who went next door to get a cup of coffee. Tell everyone else to hurry that's waiting. But next week we'll try to be more on time. Everyone will have to get their cup of coffee lined up before we start. Maybe while we're waiting these last few minutes for the coffee getters, people could just introduce themselves, at least to say their names, because we can have a chance to, as the year goes on, to get to know each other better. I'm Miriam Rhodes. Well, you may as well say your name since you're in the room, and even though you're... Giddy? Oh. Oh. Right, there's a seat over here, actually, I guess. It's not very large. It's a small, it's a small, humble seat. And this is and the English papers, did they ever come that Moshe had translated the 4 sheets of Tanya into English? So it never arrived. All right, well, we'll give these out, and I'm going to translate every word into English. So you could take one of those while we're waiting. My tendency would be just to begin, but it seems so cruel. What? More into the microphone. Okay, we can get all the technology set up while we're waiting. Maybe I'll say, they did it, it's, because it's so exciting, each possible thought. No one should miss it. We'll give them another 30 seconds and then we'll just begin. Start. I hope the other ladies are close behind you. Yes. Next time it's always much more organized and on time. All right. So I'm Miriam Rhodes, and we're going to be learning Tanya for the next few classes. I'm going to be giving an introduction today, and maybe I'll give a little introduction about myself. That I came to Crown Heights in 1974, which is when I started to learn Tanya and be part of the Hasidic community, and it was a time that the Rebbe was there. We lived in Crown Heights for almost 30 years, and I had a chance to learn Tanya with some of the great teachers of the generation. And for the last 10 years, we've been living in beautiful Bat Ayin in Gush Etzion. And I've been a student of Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg since 1984. I guess that's almost 30 years. And yes, well, in short, I guess we'll all get to know each other better as the term progresses, but that gives you, in short, a little bit. So they say it's very good it's an old Jewish tradition to start with a joke. Now, I'm actually not so funny in the beginning. Sometimes in the middle I can become funny, but it's very hard to just start, I find, to be funny in the beginning. So at some point we'll see if we can get some spontaneous humor. Rav, this great sage Rav, would always start with a joke. The Alter Rebbe actually brings this down in Tanya. It's in the Gemara, but the Alter Rebbe brings it down that he would start with a joke, and nobody wanted to be late because the joke was so funny, and if you came late, you missed the joke, and no one else could say the joke as funnily as he could, so no one came late to that class. Everyone had their coffee right there, ready to go, and everyone laughed. It even includes, not only did he take the joke, but the Gemara and the Alter Rebbe and Tanya brings down that everyone laughed. Thank you so much. Now, I'm actually, when we start to learn the Tanya inside, I'm going to translate every single word, but for anyone who would feel more secure having the English by their side, we're going to pass those out too. Everyone should feel as secure as possible. So, I'm going to give a little background to the history behind the Tanya, and then we'll hopefully have a chance to learn a little bit inside today. Okay. Historical background. I put some years up on the board here just to get some historic context. I don't know if you want to put the camera up on those dates, Moshe, or I can just read them out loud, whatever seems easier. So the founder of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Yisroel Baal Shem Tov, lived from 1698 to 1760, and we know these classes that we're learning together, taking together, are all based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. When he passed away, the leadership of the Hasidic movement was taken over by his student, the Maggid of Mezrich, Reb Dovber. And then the third leader, the Alter Rebbe, the writer of the Tanya and the Shulchan Aruch, was born in 1745. And he passed away in 1813, and we'll get up to that as I'll speak a little bit about his life, just to have some context of how and where the Tanya was written. So the Alter Rebbe was born in Lyozhna in White Russia to his parents, Reb Boruch and Rebbetzin Rivka. At the age of 18, he knew all of Gemara and the commentaries by heart. He knew Jewish philosophy and Kabbalah. In 1760, he married Rebbetzin Sterna, and soon after that, he left home in search of a Rebbe. And there were two cities at that time to choose from. There was Vilna, which was the center of Talmud learning, and there was Mezrich, where the Maggid had assumed leadership after the Baal Shem Tov, and where Hasidis was being taught. So this really could all be written up as a tale of two cities. Would it be Mezrich or would it be Vilna? And the Alter Rebbe had heard that Hasidis illuminates the divine service of a Jew. This is what he had heard about Hasidis. It illuminates the divine service of a Jew. Avoda is davening, and he felt prayer was something he had never really learned about. And he chose to go to Mezrich. When he first came to Mezrich, he didn't feel he really fit in so well. The vibes weren't exactly what he was looking for, and he went to the shul to pick up something. He thought maybe he would leave, and when he walked into the shul, the Maggid of Mezrich was there, and he was analyzing whether a lung of a cow was kosher, the lung of a cow. And the brilliance of the Maggid's analysis just convinced the Alter Rebbe that he was going to stay in Mezrich. And this was the turning point. This was the turning point of the Alter Rebbe's life. So, and the brilliance of the Maggid made such an impression on him that he stayed. And when he had Yechidus, when he was alone with the Maggid for the first time, the Maggid, Mezricher Maggid, told the Alter Rebbe that the Baal Shem Tov told him, his teacher told him, that the son of Reb Boruch would come to him. The son of Reb Boruch is the Alter Rebbe, would come to him, and the Maggid should tell him the destiny linked to his soul. The destiny linked to his soul. The Baal Shem Tov said to tell the Alter Rebbe that his path would be filled with challenges, but the Baal Shem Tov would intercede in his behalf, and his end would be great. So that was quite a message, as you can understand. I mean, just for any of us for a holy person to tell us what is the destiny of our soul can be quite handy information to have. And to know that the Baal Shem Tov, who was in Shemayim at this time, was going to intercede for him in Shemayim for the difficulties and the challenges that he would encounter. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe decided to cast his lot with the new Hasidic movement. And after 18 months, he became one of the greatest of the Maggid students. He was also the youngest student at this time. He returned to White Russia. He would visit the Maggid periodically. In 1767, he became the Maggid in Liozna, where he was born, and then he moved to Liadi in 1801, where his center of teaching was set up. Now, the Alter Rebbe was known as the Litvak by all his friends. That was his nickname, being that he came from White Russia, close to Lita. It was a very studious mentality. And there was a little story I heard that one of the great Rebbeim, also a student of the Maggid at the time, was Rabbi Nachum of Chernobyl. Rabbi Nachum of Chernobyl, of course, lived in Chernobyl, and he had, in his house, he had a nursery where his grandchildren slept when they came to visit. So one night, the Alter Rebbe came. He came to visit Reb Nachum of Chernobyl. He came down to the nursery, and he felt the foreheads of all the little grandsons who were sleeping. At the time, there was a 2-year-old named Yaakov Yisroel, a grandson of Reb Nachum of Chernobyl. And when the Alter Rebbe felt his forehead, he said, "Yes, this is the one. We'll make, L'Trop Tanoim. I have a, 2-year-old granddaughter. This is the shidduch." Of course, the daughter always, of course, has a choice. She can't, each woman can choose whether she wants to go into this marriage. But I guess she trusted her grandfather, feeling the foreheads couldn't go wrong. So they made that arrangement. And then the very next night, Reb Baruch of Chernobyl, Reb Baruch of Mezerbush came to visit Rabbi Nachman. He was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. He had some questions about the Chabad style of learning. Maybe we'll get to that later. And he also came down and he started feeling the foreheads of all the grandchildren. And he picked that same one, Yaakov Yisroel. And the Rav Nachum of Chernobyl said, "Sorry, the Litvak came last night and chapped him." Too late. So that was, and all the Twerskis come from that shidduch. If you've ever met any of the vast Tversky family that's spread out from Milwaukee and over the world, they all come from that shidduch. Oh, if anyone wants to put their phone on vibrate, you get extra credit right away. Okay, so the Maggid assigned the Alter Rebbe to write an updated version of the Shulchan Aruch. To do this acquired the ability to know all of Talmudic literature, all of halachic literature, to be able to make decisions in disputed cases. And this is what the Alter Rebbe did. It's known as the Rav Shulchan Aruch. And this gave the Alter Rebbe a place among codifiers of Jewish law until today, the Rav Shulchan Aruch. The Maggid passed away, as we see there in those little notes, in 1772. In 1777, the senior colleague of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, he was also a student of the Maggid. He was a very close friend of the Alter Rebbe, but he was much older, so he was really his senior colleague. He made Aliyah. In 1777, there was a Hasidic Aliyah. A whole group of Hasidim came with Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk. They went first to Tzfat, where the winds kept them up at night. As, people who are very sensitive to the winds of Tzfat. It can keep you up at night. So they moved to Tveria, which has quieter winds. And Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk is actually buried in Tveria. If you're ever are going past the old cemetery, it's right across from the Kinneret. You're going north towards Tveria. There's the kever of Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes. Then there's the old cemetery, and in the old cemetery there's a giant tree, and under it are the Hasidim who had the good fortune to see the holy face of the Baal Shem Tov. They're all buried there together in Tveria, including Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, who did the first Hasidic Aliyah. Before Menachem Mendel left for Eretz Yisrael, he went with the Alter Rebbe to Vilna to visit the Gra in hopes of making shalom between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim, but the Gra refused to see him for whatever information that he was told. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it means that apparently the students of the Gra who didn't want this peace between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim told the Gra that the Alter Rebbe ate on Tisha B'Av, but they didn't mention that it was Shabbos that year. So, and that's, that was how Shabtai Tzvi began his rebellion, was eating on Tisha B'Av. So it was considered a sign of rebelling against Hashem. So that shalom was not made at that point. Now today we're doing much better. Even in non-Hasidic camps they sing Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is really everywhere. So Baruch Hashem, you can see we're getting closer to the Geula Shalema. Okay, so so after Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk went to Eretz Yisrael, the Alter Rebbe was appointed the leader of the Hasidim in White Russia and Lita in Lithuania. And it was only after Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk passed away, because the Alter Rebbe also saw him as his teacher, that he accepted the leadership. There were many, many students. The Alter Rebbe was teaching how the Jew is an intermediary between the Creator and creation. And this idea is as well as many of the ideas of how Hasidus illuminates the service of the Jew, caused students and students of students of many students to come. Now, the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe worked on the Tanya for 20 years. It's considered the Torah Shebeksav, the written Torah of Hasidus. It's systematic. And in 1792, it was still only in handwritten copies. Now, as these handwritten copies, this is before Xerox machines, as these handwritten copies were being passed around and recopied, there were errors that crept in. There also were forgeries, where people who wanted to give Hasidus a bad name changed things in order to make it seem as if it was saying something that was not in accord with the Torah. Mistakes made their way into the text, and the Alter Rebbe agreed to print it, but with two conditions. One condition that would be that it have the haskama, the approbation of Reb Zusha of Anapoli and Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKohen, who were older students of the Maggid, who the Alter Rebbe considered his senior students. And the second was that he insisted that these first printings would be anonymous, that it wouldn't have his name in it. It was Likutei Amorim. We're going to talk about the different names of the Tanya, but Likutei Amorim, a gathering of teachings. Okay, and in 1796, the first copies were printed in Slavita. There's many exciting stories about the Slavita printing press, but we'll save them for another time. Okay, 1798, the enemies of Hasidis, the opponents of Hasidus, in order to stifle the spreading of Hasidus, informed on the Alter Rebbe to the Tsarist government that the Alter Rebbe was betraying the monarchy. Okay, now, one of the reasons is very well known. The other is, you might have heard, so one of the reasons they gave of how the Alter Rebbe was betraying the monarchy of the Tsar was at this point, Russia and Turkey were at war. For a few years, they had been at war. At this point, Eretz Yisrael was under Turkish domination, and the Hasidim who had made this Aliyah in 1777, their only means of survival was money that was sent to them by the Hasidim in Russia. I mean, the Hasidim in Russia weren't rich, but at least they had means of parnasa. If you think it's bad today in Eretz Yisrael finding a job, I mean, then it was really practically impossible. They needed to survive this money being sent. So the money was being sent from Russia to Turkey, the enemies said, that the Alter Rebbe was supporting a hostile foreign government by sending money to the Hasidim. And many of the letters in the Tanya speak about how it's a tremendous mitzvah to support Jews in Eretz Yisrael. If you ever go fundraising, bring along your Tanya. Only kidding, only kidding.
But you said I was supporting the Jews in Turkey.
But the Turkey was, Eretz Yisrael was part of Turkey. So that was but they, you can see it, the truth was being compromised. And then the other reason how they said that the Alter Rebbe, excuse me, I do have a little cold, forgive me. I hope by next week I'll be all better. L'chaim. Thank you. The other way is actually more amusing. So you see I've drawn with my own little hands this little chart of the Spheros, which we'll be learning more about. Some people already have a background on it. We have Chabad on top, Chachma, Bina, and Das. And then there's the Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And what's on the very bottom? Malchus, royalty. So the enemies of the spread of Hasidus told the Tsar that the Alter Rebbe is undermining the Tsar's authority, his royal authority. He's saying Malchus is the lowest of the Spheros. Therefore, he's rebelling against the Tsar. Isn't that cute? Isn't that cute? I thought that was quite cute. Undermining royal authority by saying Malchus doesn't have anything of its own, receives from the higher Spheros. It was considered rebellion. So the Alter Rebbe was arrested on Isru Chag Sukkot, 1798. A black carriage arrived in Liadi, and he was with an armed guard, and the people didn't have a very high success rate in Tsarist Russia if they were taken away in this black carriage. He was taken to Petersburg, which was Leningrad for a long time. Now it's back to being Petersburg. And he was put in the Petropavlovsk fortress under very, very harsh conditions. We actually were there, my husband and I had the schus of being shluchim of the Rebbe to communist Russia in the early 80s, when it was still illegal to live as a Jew, to teach Yiddishkeit, to do anything. And we went as tourists. That was, how we legally went. So to do something to tour, because all of our at the time was spent with the underground, which wasn't legal to meet. So we decided we would go to the Petropavlovsk fortress because the communists made it into a museum to show how bad the Tsar was, because he put people under these terrible conditions, and it's right on the Neva River, and the hotel we were put up in was right there, so it's like the air in Leningrad. You could just breathe in the Mesiras Nefesh of the Hasidim, from the last 200 years. So it was just inspiring breathing there, like, wow. So it was on the river itself, and the cells flooded, and when the water went up in the river, like they were like standing there in icy cold water. I mean, it was a very severe punishment. But 53 days later, the Alter Rebbe was released on Yud Tes Kislev, which is, we'll have a chance to speak more about that as it gets closer, but it's known as Yom HaGeula, the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. We start learning Tanya. Knew that there's a custom of learning a little bit of Tanya every day, and people all over the world are doing it. It's called Chitas. We learned Chumash, say Tehillim, and learn Tanya. It was something the Rebbe really encourages, a protection for all kinds of things. Plus, what the Parsha is. That's always good. And doing Tanya over and over again for 40 years does have its rubbing off effect. And it's good to say Tehillim. There's always something to say Tehillim for. So the Tanya part of it starts new. And so this was the Yom HaGeula, and at that point, after the Alter Rebbe was released, that's when Hasidus began to flower, and it was taught all over. It began to really spread. There's a story, while the Alter Rebbe was in jail, a high minister had heard of the Alter Rebbe, a non-Jew, but a religious non-Jew, disguised himself as an interrogator, and he came in, and he said to the Alter Rebbe, because he had studied Chumash, he said, what does it mean when Hashem says to Adam, Ayeka, Bubistu, where are you? What does it mean? And the Alter Rebbe was able, through his nevuah, to say, first he said to him, do you believe that everything written in the Torah is true and has eternal meaning to every person? And this minister said yes. The Alter Rebbe was happy to hear that. And he mentioned the age, that if you're 56 years old, at any point, Hashem can say to you, are you fulfilling the mission of your soul's descent to this earth? This is what Ayeka means. Are you fulfilling the mission of your soul's descent to this earth? And this minister, this was really, I guess, a life-changing. And for all of us, I mean, anytime we think about that, are we fulfilling the mission that our soul came down for? So hopefully our learning together this year, our learning Hasidus together, will help us all be a step closer to doing that. There was so once it kind of resolved a little bit the conflicts with the non-Hasidic world, there was also conflicts within the Hasidic world. Rabbi Avram of Kalisk and Rabbi Baruch of Mezerbush didn't feel that Hasidus should be Chabad. Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Das, sometimes translated as wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, though I think translating as Chachma as conception and Bina as conceptualization and Das as application might be more meaningful words, more because it's otherwise it can be a little blurry exactly what's the difference between the first three, was how the Alter Rebbe felt we had to use our intellect in order to internalize the concepts, that it couldn't become part of our lives. There were other Hasidim, like Rab Avram of Kalisk, that felt it could only be grasped through Emunah, that you couldn't bring Hasidus down to Chabad. And this was, they had some philosophical difference of opinion over there, which some people always take more seriously than other people. But we see that the Alter Rebbe calls his movement Chabad, and we'll see how it means that any person, no matter what their intellectual accomplishments are, can start to apply their Chachma, Bina, and Das in order to internalize the concepts of Hasidus that we're going to be talking about very soon. Okay, that they can become part of our reality. Okay, the last historic piece of information before we get to the text. So 1812, Napoleon started his drive to conquer Russia, which of course led to his total defeat. And the Alter Rebbe sided with the Tsar of Russia. He felt that the Jews would be in better condition, closer to Hashem, under the leadership of the Tsar than under the leadership of Napoleon at that time. He even sent one of his Hasidim to be a spy in Napoleon's inner camp, Rabbi Moshe Meisels. There's stories about that. The French troops approached Liadi in the summer of 1812, and the Alter Rebbe organized his family to flee. By the way, an interesting point is the Alter Rebbe made sure that nothing was left in the house, and the house should be burnt down, because he felt that Napoleon was a black magician, and he didn't want him to have any of his possessions. And when Napoleon came to Liadi, he asked, does anyone have anything that belongs to the Alter Rebbe? And no one gave. I mean, there were Jews that had, but everyone understood that this wasn't what the Alter Rebbe wanted, that Napoleon should have anything that belonged to his. So this, and they started moving. The Alter Rebbe was moving deeper and deeper into the Russian winter. For 5 months, he was fleeing Napoleon. In Tevis, he reached Piena, a small village in Kursk province. And it was already the thick of so the 24th of Tevis was Motzi. Could you mind closing the door, that echo? Thank you. It was Motzi Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe daven Ma'ariv. He made Havdalah. The Alter Rebbe wrote a letter, a very mystical letter that's included in the letters in Tanya, and then he passed away. And it's interesting because one of the people that had been in the Hasidic camp that had been fighting the Alter Rebbe over Chabad was Reb Baruch of Mezerbush, who was 1,000 miles away at that time in Mezerbush, and he was making Havdalah. And the cup dropped from his hand, and he said, a great light has gone out from the world. And this was before internet, before Facebook. You had to be a Navi in those days, you know. Now we're not, you know, we have our electronic device. We haven't really honed our Navi skills. But maybe from this class, as a side benefit, you can let me know. Okay. So, all right. So the Tanya. Now we're getting closer to actually looking at the Tanya. The Tanya has 3 names. It's known by 3 names. One is Likutei Amorim, a compiling of teachings. One is the name Tanya, which is what we generally call it. It's the initial word of the first book. It's quoting a brisa in the Talmud. A brisa, by the way, for people not familiar with the term, when Yehuda Halevi put together the Mishnah. It's not Yehuda Halevi. Yehuda Hanassi. Thank you, see? Good. I knew it didn't resonate properly. Yehuda Hanassi put together the Mishnah. There were many teachings that people knew by heart that were very similar to the Mishnah that were left out, or they're quoted in the Gemara, and they're known as brisas, britod. Bar means outside in Aramaic. So Tanya means a brisa is about to be quoted in the Gemara. And so it begins with this word Tanya, and this is the most common, the word Tanya. In the book, we call it Tanya, like, as I said, we're going to learn some Tanya together today. And the third name is the name that the Alter Rebbe himself always referred to the book, and that's Sefer Shel Beinonim. The book of the intermediate, the book of the average man, the average person. This is the hero of the Tanya. Not someone who's a super holy saint, but average people just like us. Okay. So this is the idea that we're going to be looking at, the idea of who is the Beinoni. So now we're ready to look at the title page of the Tanya. So it's on the front. You can look at just the straight Hebrew. You can look at it with the English. I'm going to translate every word, so nobody should worry about it. When I read Hebrew, and everyone should forgive me, I'm going to read it with my Ashkenazi Brooklyn accent, since that's how I learned to read Tanya from my holy teachers, and I'll feel like my... Oh, you didn't get one? Are these... Oh. So maybe you could share for now, and we'll order more. They didn't realize we were going to have such a wonderful... Oh, without the English, do we have any extra one? Is this an extra one over here? Oh, okay. All right, so everyone has something they could at least look at. So the Alter Rebbe himself wrote this page. When we begin the Tanya anew, we actually begin with this page. It's part of the Chitas of learning Tanya. So here we go. Sefer Likutei Amarim. So this is the book that's a compilation of teachings, Chelik Rishon, the first part, that's called Hanikra B'Shem Sefer Shel Beinonim, the ordinary man. And the Alter Rebbe finds this ordinary man that he has a conflict between his egotistical self and his transcendental self. This can be a conflict. Did it ever happen to any of us? Yes, it happens all the time. We can almost write down the conversation. We can write a play, what my egotistical self has to say and what my transcendental self has to say. Or you can call them the animal soul, the godly soul, the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. But I think that kind of sums it up. You know, I should mention, since it says we know that mentioning your teachers who you heard something from brings the Geula closer, and I had the schus to learn Tanya from Rabbi Manis Friedman, from Rabbi Label Groner, who's the Rebbe's secretary, from Reb Steinsaltz, from Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Jacobson, and from Rabbi Ginsburg, who I mentioned that I've been a student of his for almost 30 years. All right, so from time to time I'll give individual mentions, but just to give credit to my holy teachers. Okay, so, again, so this is the Beinoni, and this is the whole book of the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe had such faith in ordinary people. He had such faith in people like us that he wrote a book just for us, Sefer Shalveinanim. Okay, continuing. Melukat mipi sforim umipi sofrim, Kedoshei Elyon Nishmas Eden. So this has been gathered from books, and when the Alter Rebbe says sforim, he's referring to Tanakh, to Medrash, to the Rambam, before the Rambam, to the Talmud, to the Rambam who lived in the 12th century, and also the great 16th century teachers, the Maharal, the Arizal, the Shalah. All of these are referred to when the Alter Rebbe says it's based on books. The Alter Rebbe, by the way, was an 8th generation Ben Acher Ben from the Maharal. A few years ago, we had the schus to go with Rabbi Ginsburg to Prague we had about a 3 or 4 day seminary on the Maharal right there in Prague, where it's possible to go to the Maharal Shul and the Maharal's Kever. And at that time, Rabbi Ginsburg listed, it's known the names of the 8 sons that are in between the Maharal and Rabbi Ginsburg. So not only was the Maharal the great-great-great-grandfather of the Alter Rebbe, but also a teacher that he bases the Tanya on. And then when it says Mipi Sofrim, authors, that's going on the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezerich. Kadoshei Elyon, their souls are in Gan Eden. Miyusad al Pasuk, and the Alter Rebbe bases it on a Pasuk from Chumash Devorim, Kikorev Alecha Hadavar Ma'od, Beficha Ulevavcha La'asoso. Very close to you, Kikorev Alecha Hadavar, close to you is this thing, very, very close, Ma'od, Beficha, in your mouth, Ubevavcha, in your heart, La'asoso, to do it. Now this pasuk appears in Devorim, where Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to the Jewish people, and he says to them, the Torah is not in heaven, that you have to send somebody up to Shemayim and bring it down to you. The Torah is not across the sea, where you have to send somebody across the sea and bring it back to you, but Kikor V'alecha Hadavar Ma'od. And this is what the Alter Rebbe bases the Tanya in. Now this, of course, is a big question, because often it doesn't seem that way with all the instructions of the Torah, and this is talking about Beficha, B'lvavcha La'asoso, so it's action, it's words, and L'vavcha is in our thought, in our heart. It doesn't always seem so close. Our personal experience is that often davening, we're not quite there, but breakfast seems so normal. It's so easy to relate to breakfast. Davening can be so tricky to relate to. It's like we're more the animal part has been had a lot of experience. It seems natural. We don't have to think about too much about it. The davening we have to work on, focusing, being there, that it shouldn't be mechanical, all of these things. So this is what the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya for, so that it shouldn't be routine. How can it really be in our heart? How can it really be in our actions? Okay, actions in a sense is the easiest to get a hold of. It's not, sometimes depending on what we want to stop doing it or start doing, it can be hard, but it's the easiest of the 3 garments of the soul, is getting a handle on actions. Speech is more complicated. We don't want to speak Lashon Hara. We want to put positive energy into the world with our words. But these things, it's hard. It's a challenge. It's a constant challenge to know, to actually think, am I going to be adding positive energy to the world with my next words? I mean, it's a lot of work getting that one down. And of course, the final frontier is thought. The final frontier is thought management, ultimately, because to know what we're thinking all the time is a tremendous discipline. But it's, once we get the thought part down, once we're not thinking Lashon Hara, we no longer have to worry about not speaking Lashon Hara. And this is the Hasidic approach. The Hasidic approach is not to just sign up, from 2 to 4 on Tuesday, I'm not going to speak Lashon Hara, but to not think it, to really work on my Avos Yisrael, that see each Jew as a part of myself, and just like I wouldn't want someone to say something bad about me, how can I speak badly about another person. But ultimately, and what we're going to be speaking a lot is this thought management level. Because there's no way to get around it, and it doesn't seem so close. It doesn't seem so close to know what I'm thinking. It's like, it's almost being, in a certain way, it's like being in a constant stage of meditation, to know what I'm thinking about all the time. But this is what the Alter Rebbe is telling us, and he's going to show us. Kikorav alecha hadavar ma'od beficha levavcha la'asoso ulevara heitiv, and to explain it well, eichu korav, how it's close, not only close, but korav ma'od, b'derech arucha v'katzara be'ezrat Hashem yisporach. With the help of Hashem, may He be blessed. How it's close in a way that's long and short. Long and short with Hashem's help. Now this expression, excuse me, I'll have to just make a little l'chaim on my throat tea for a moment. L'chaim, l'chaim. So, this comes from a famous story in the Gemara, Arucha v'Katzara. A famous story involving Yehoshua ben Hananiah. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah was on his way to Yerushalayim, to the city of God, and he reached a crossroads. And at this crossroads there was a young child. And he asked the child, what's the fastest way to the city? And the child says, there's a short and long way, and there's a long and short way. Okay, so he says short and long. We have the word short first. He thought he would take that way. And it was he went on that way, and it was a very smooth and even road. But then he came to something, an abyss, something that he saw the city, but there was no way to enter the city. Like he could see it, it was close, but he couldn't get into the city of God. He couldn't do it. So he went all the way back to the crossroads, and he said to the boy, you know, what's with the short? And so he told him this was it was short, but it was long. You couldn't actually get into the city. The long but short road, it's long, it's windy, it goes around, it's really the journey of a lifetime. But eventually it's short, and you will get in to the city of God. And he was actually very tight. He kissed this little boy, and he said, Ashrecha Yisroel. You know, what great people, young people, old people, Jews are really cool. He didn't get worked up or anything, such a good role model for us. He just appreciated the young boy's wisdom. So this is what the Alter Rebbe shows, the long but short way. The short but long way we can see as sometimes, you know, we're inspired, we want to go to the city of God, but somehow we lose that inspiration and we don't actually get there. We don't actually get in, because to actually get in is the long but short way. It's the work of a lifetime. It's all thought management, action man. You know, we have to get these things down before we can really meditate on the greatness of God, which the Alter Rebbe speaks a lot about. Before we can really start to meditate, we have to be aware of what we're thinking. We have to know what we're thinking in odd moments. We have to, so that takes, and we have to be inspired to do it, because it takes effort to not just, you know, be hypnotized by our thoughts, but to actually want to choose what they should be. So this is the long but short way that we're about to learn together. And the Alter Rebbe ends it. Don't forget, he adds the Ezrat Hashem Yisporach. So he wrote the book with Hashem's help, but also this journey that we're embarking on together is also Hashem should help us. Hashem should help us. We should be able to learn the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, especially the teachings that apply to psychology. That's what we're going to be focusing on this term, and Hashem should help us internalize it. Okay, so now, a cute little story. This actually is a little story from Rabbi Jacobson that he he told about. I mentioned that that the Alter Rebbe wanted the haskama of Rabbi Zusha of Anapoli and Rabbi Yehuda Aleib HaKohen. They both lived in Anapoli, which was also in the Ukraine. It's a lovely drive from Mezrich. If you ever go visit the Kforim, the Maggid of Mezrich is also buried there, and Reb Zusha and Reb Yehuda Leib HaKohen. So the Alter Rebbe, before it was printed, the Alter Rebbe sent shluchim with a copy of two shluchim with 2 copies of the manuscript of Tanya. So he wanted them to review it, and he wanted their haskama, their approbation. So 1 copy in the early evening was delivered to Reb Zusha, and 1 copy was delivered to Reb Yehuda Leib HaKohen. So Reb Zusha starts reading it, and he's getting really excited. It's like fantastic, it's wonderful, it's inspiring, it's brilliant, it's revolutionary. And by midnight, he's just in ecstasy, and he feels he just can't even keep it to himself anymore. He's going to just run over to Yehuda Leib HaKohen and share it with him. He's just so excited. And you won't believe it, but the exact same thing happened to Yehuda Leib HaKohen. He also started reading it in the early evening, and he's reading it, and he's just also going into ecstasy, and at midnight also he can't control himself, and he has to run over and share it with his friend, and there's a bridge in the middle of Anapoli, and they're both running to the bridge, and they both run in the bridge, and they meet in the bridge, and when they meet each other, and they're both holding the manuscripts of the Tanya, they say at that point, Hasidim say, Anapoli lit up in light at that moment. You can each decide yourself what that might mean. Okay. So now, ta-dum, we're going to do a little bit, we have a few more minutes, and we're going to look a little bit at chapter 1 of Tanya. So that should be the next page in the handout. And this Tanya that I use when I'm teaching, I actually received from the Rebbe's holy hand. When the Rebbe's 80th birthday in 1982, Yud Aleph Nisan, there was a Farbringen. The Rebbe would always Farbring on... Rebbe said, why Farbring on a private person's birthday? Why should we have everybody getting together? But if it inspires us in our Torah, in our Avoda, then it's worth having a gathering, a Farbringen, that Jews should come together, and we should all inspire each other. And so the Rebbe's birthday is like the night, especially, it's like 3.5 days before Pesach, a busy time for the harried housewife. So till this year, the previous years, you could hear it like on the telephone. There was a way that you could call a number and hear the Rebbe Farbringen live, and you could still clean out your drawer, whatever you might be inspired to be doing 3.5 days before Pesach. But this was the Rebbe's 80th birthday, so I thought, I had to go. I mean, the Rebbe's Farbringens would always begin at 9:30. He was never late. And so the Farbringen went from 9:30 to 1:30 in the morning. And then, as a surprise, no one knew it was going to happen, the Rebbe gave out these Tanyas to every man, woman, and child in Crown Heights. It lasted until about 7 a.m. in the morning. People drove in who didn't live too far away. And they're quite heavy, and the Rebbe lifted each one up and put it in the hands of the person receiving it. And I did get to see the Rebbe's blue eyes at that moment. And no doubt the Rebbe looked at me and saw all of us gathered together here on this lovely fall day in Yerushalayim. Baruch Hashem. So I just wanted to share that little anecdote. Okay, so let's look. Tanya, Perek Aleph, Tanya. Okay, so it was taught, and we know it means it was taught in a brisa, because generally if it was taught in a Mishnah, the word Tanan is used. Tanya is more a word. I also learned out from Rabbi Yosef Goldstein, Olav Shalom, one of my first Tanya teachers, that the word Tanya itself is a name of the 50th level, lowest level of Klippa. And Tanya lifts up from that level, which means any person can walk in from the street and start learning Tanya. Someone can connect. There's no person who can feel they're so far away that they can't connect with something in Tanya. It's really Sefer Shel Beinoni, the book for the average person. So, but Sof Perek Gimel Danida is that little at the end of the third paragraph of the third parak of Gemara Nida. Mashbin Oso. So a person is made to swear. The fetus is made to swear before it comes into the world. Actually, the little background here is Rabbi Simloy is teaching this at the end of Gemara Nida. right before this part, he tells the story. This part is more well known. You might have heard the idea. Rabbi Simloi says that a child is taught the whole Torah while in the womb of his mother. This is a more common idea. And before it's born, a malach comes and creates a cleft beneath the nose, which causes the child to forget the whole Torah. That's very well known. But right after that, Rabbi Simloi continues with what's quoted here now in the beginning of Tanya, Masbim, also, so the same fetus is made to swear, an oath is administered, Tehit Tzaddik va'al tehi Rasha. Be a Tzaddik and don't be a Rasha, okay? Va'afilu kol ha'olam kulo omrim lecha Tzaddik aton. Even if the whole world says to you, you're a Tzaddik, haya be'anecha karasha. Be in your own eyes ka Russia. This ka is, which is just like as a Russia. Be in your own eyes as a Russia. We're going to get back to this ka. This is an important ka. You could circle it in bright colors if you like, because this is really the beginning of our understanding of who that Beinani is. So even the whole world says to you, you're tzaddik, because our friends will always tell us, oh, you're such a tzaddik, because they might see our actions. Maybe we're kind to walruses or something. I don't know. They might think we're kind people, and we might speak nicely to them. But they don't know that inner battle, the inner battle, the thoughts that arise in the mind. I mean, it's like they're not really, we can tell them about it, but they're not really there with us, fighting them at all hours of the day and night. So our friends can tell us, you're a tzaddik. There's many people, I really do think, friends, neighbors, they seem like tzaddikim to me. So the Alter Rebbe says, it brings down from the Gemara. So even when the whole world says this to you, be in your own eyes like a Rasha. Then the Alter Rebbe says, V'tzorich lahavin tehei tanan. We have to understand, but something is conflicting with this. Something in Pirkei Avos is in direct conflict with this idea. In Pirkei Avos chapter 2, Avos Perek Beis, it says, Va'al tehi Rasha b'vnei atzmecha. Don't be a Rasha in your own eyes. What's going on? It seems like there's a conflict between the Gemara, between the Mishnah, though of course you notice that here the Rasha doesn't have a k in front of it, okay, because that's going to be one of the mysteries. That's going to help us solve some of the deep mysteries here. We will get to that. I want to keep everyone at the edge of their seats. Everyone should come back, finding out what we're going to find out more about the Beinani as we continue. Vagam, and the Alter Rebbe is saying more questions. So first of all, we have a question, what's going on with the Mishnah conflicting with the Gemara? Are we supposed to be a tzaddik, not, consider ourselves a tzaddik, not a Rasha, not consider ourselves a Rasha? What's going on? Then the Alter Rebbe says, V'gam in yihya be'enav karasha, and if you look at yourself as a Rasha, yara levavo, you're going to be depressed. I mean, I'm a Rasha. You can't be too cheerful about that. Usually when people are doing tachanun, they look kind of sad. They're usually not, I did that sin. It's usually kind of, so you can be yara levavo, feel a little bad. V'yiyah etzav, and be depressed, grieved. V'lo yochel la'avod Hashem b'simcha u'v'tuv levav. And if you're depressed, you're not able to serve Hashem with simcha and peace of heart. So that's a problem. That's a problem right away. What's going on? So he's saying the first problem to seeing yourself as a Rasha is that you could get depressed. There's another problem. V'im lo. Let's say you're not depressed. I'm a Rasha, but I'm not depressed. Below Yira Levavo, my heart is not depressed about it. Klal at all. Mizeh, not from the fact that I'm a Rasha. Yochel Levoli de Kalos Chas B'Shalom. We could come to Kalos Rosh. We can come to light-mindedness. We can come to think, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm a Rasha, so let's be honest. I'm a Rasha, so I'm already a Rasha, so why should I try? Why should I try? And it doesn't matter what I do. I can just do whatever I want because I'm a Rasha. So either way, if we consider ourselves a Rasha, we'll either be depressed or we'll be careless. So it doesn't seem like it's a good thing. So what's with the oath that even if your friends say you're a tzaddik, consider yourself like a Rasha? Okay. Acha inyan. Ki hine matzinu b'Gemora he chalukos. We find in the Gemara 5 different categories. And it's interesting, they're not listed as such. It's not like in the Gemara you're going to find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Alter Rebbe gathers these 5 categories together, and they are tzaddik v'tovlo, a tzaddik and good is his. We're going to be speaking more about the fine definitions here, but just to get the 5 categories. Tzaddik v'tovlo, tzaddik v'ralo, a tzaddik, and the ra is, we'll see, he has a little ra, but he controls it. It's his. It's under his control. The little tiny ra that might be left somewhere is always under his control. Rasha v'tovlo, and we're going to find out that's the Rasha that has good in him. We're going to find out that is a really, really, really big category of people, because that amount of tov that the Rasha has in him could be very small amount of tov, a medium amount of tov. You know, it's really a question. We're going to discuss the Rasha v'tovlo. Yes, the Rasha v'tovlo, and the final and then the Rasha v'ralo. This is the complete Rasha who never has a thought of tshuva. The Rasha v'tovlo does have thoughts of tshuva. Doesn't always listen to them, but thoughts of tshuva. We all have thoughts of tshuva.
They're defining it as like the righteousness of sufferers,
Right, we're going to. Right, there's different. We're going to talk about the different definitions as we go along. So there's also that I'm just giving the literal interpretation. But then it turns out with those definitions, those first definitions, we're going to transcend them. Okay, and the final category is the Beinani. And the Beinani, again, is the hero of the Tanya. The hero of the Tanya, and that's the 5th category, which we're going to define in great detail. Now, maybe we just actually have a few more minutes. Maybe we'll just should take questions now and stop at this point. So, are there questions from people online, Hila? Were there questions? Or maybe we can... Okay, so we'll give people... All right, we don't really have so much time, but does anyone have any questions here that they'd like to ask? All right, so we can... Okay, yes.
Just a general question on the meaning of Tanya. I know it's, like you said, it's the lowest klipa, but it also has that much good attached to it, right? I vaguely remember.
It was taught. It means in Aramaic, it was taught.
Is it like you were saying?
It also comes. It also yes, in the secret part of Torah, in the history, in the mysteries of Torah, it also is that. So we elevate from that point up. Any person can learn Tanya and be elevated. There's no one who's too far away. Yeah, yes, yes, yes.
So what's
It's
a
what a beautiful
Well, I
name.
changed the spelling of it a
Tanya.
while back when I was
No,
in
it's-
Crown Heights, and I looked into a Tanya and I saw it's the lowest klipa. Okay, it's now going to be Tafnun Yud Hey and not Tafnun Yud Aleph.
No, but it's a word from the Holy Gemara. It's a holy word for sure. It's a holy word. It was taught. It's a word that's common in the Gemara. It's a cute name. We like it.
You have someone telling you thank you, fantastic together.
Well, it must have been one of my friends who I bribed. So thank you all. Now you're going to have a little break, which is very important for a 5-hour day of learning. There's refreshments and bathrooms and all kinds of good things. And Emir Hashem will continue next week. So bring these handouts if you already got them, and we might be using the exact same handout next week. I did. I'll tell you privately because I don't want to be boring and talk too much about myself. Yes, and I'll hear your name also.